This is Examine Sport, a podcast of the sports ethicist. I am your host, Sean Klein. Each episode of Examine Sport focuses on a paper in the philosophy of sport literature. We look at classic discipline-defining articles, exciting newly published works, and dig deep for important but not as well-known papers. You can subscribe, comment, and find an archive of all shows, along with links and related information at sportsethicist.com. The distinction between tests and contests is one that runs through many discussions in the philosophy of sport. And it might strike some as somewhat pedantic at first, just playing around with words. But as Scott Kretchmar shows in his influential article, From Test to Contest, an analysis of two kinds of counterpoint in sport, published in the Journal of Philosophy of Sport in 1975, the distinction helps us to identify important features of sport. As the article title indicates, Kretchmar starts with a discussion of two kinds of point counterpoints or opposition. There is opposition by scale and opposition by cut. Now, opposition by scale is a continuum or a range along a continuum or scale. A glass is empty, but as you fill it, it moves up the scale to full. The poles of the scale are logical opposites, full or empty, but along the scale there is only more or less. Another way to think of this is a difference by degree. The change along the scale is one of magnitude, not one of type. Now, opposition by cut is a different sort of opposition. Rather than changes of magnitude up and down a scale, we have at the cut a change in type or kind. The cut is the point of exclusion of the other kind. Now, there may be a scale within one side of the cut or other, but the cut separates, quote, two exclusive opposites. Where a glass might be empty, full, or at any point in between, the substance we pour into the glass is water or non-water, A or non-A. A statement is true or false, a light is on or off. Now, these might also be thought of as a distinction between analog and digital. An analog, like a opposition of scale, is a continuous range without discrete values. Think of a dimmer switch on a light going from dim to bright, with no discrete stopping point in between. A digital system involves discrete values, an on and off. The dimmer switch shows us both the cut and the scale. The cut is where the light is on or off. That's digital. Once on, there's a scale from dim to bright. That's analog. Now, sport is a contest, and so etymology suggests that to understand the nature of the contest in sport, we have to understand the idea of a test in sport. Now, Kretchmar argues that tests are oppositions of cut, while contests are oppositions of scale. Understanding the relationship between these oppositions and between tests and contests provides us with an insight into the nature of sport. Now, a test is an opposition by cut because one succeeds at the test or one does not. The test is passed or failed. The cut is failure or success. As Kretchmar puts it, the test offers a yes or a no. Now, Kretchmar here introduces the concepts of impregnability and vulnerability. Vulnerability is the idea that there is a chance of success. A test is more or less valuable depending on how easy it is to succeed at the test. The easier it is to succeed at the test, the more vulnerable it is. Impregnability means there's no chance of success. To be wholly impregnable means there's no chance to succeed. Taking the test is futile. A test then seems to be a balance of these facets. There is some vulnerability and some impregnability. And there has to be some chance that one succeeds, the vulnerability aspect, but failure also has to be a real possibility, the impregnability. Success or failure cannot be a foregone conclusion. It's no test if the test is wholly vulnerable, since that would mean success is guaranteed. and the test is futile if it is 100% impregnable, since it would be impossible to pass. So a true test has to have some vulnerability and some sense of impregnability. This at first might make it seem like a test is a scalar opposition, that a test is more or less vulnerable and more or less impregnable. However, no matter the range of vulnerability, the chance of success, or impregnability, the chance of failure, the test itself presents the opposition by cut. The test is passed or not. So the importance of the concepts of vulnerability and impregnability here are to point us to the necessity of tests being ambiguous and uncertain. A test necessarily must be uncertain. Quote, one's testing gesture is forever tentative. It aims for success, but is never assured of it. The tester can never be certain of the outcome. A test necessarily is ambiguous. The paths one can take towards success are not clear. There may not even be a path to one's goal. Kretchmar illustrates this with the mountain climber choosing paths that promise to take him or her to the summit, but understanding, quote, that these very paths may truly be no way to the summit, end quote. If there is no ambiguity, either the success is a foregone conclusion or there is no escape from failure. Now this takes us to contests. Kretchmar describes contests as shared tests, one in which each side is committed to the, quote, attempt to better the other's performance. Contests involve opponents, and a victory or defeat is defined in relation to those opponents. Quote, victory is always victory over someone. The interesting twist here is that it would seem contests with their opponents contesting against each other would be an opposition of cut. We have two distinct sides in opposition to each other. One wins or loses. But Kretchmar argues that opponents are not true contraries doing the opposite of each other. For example, one side trying to score goals while the other is trying to score non-goals. Instead, each opponent, quote, is doing the same kind of thing in an attempt to show difference in the direction of superiority. In other words, contesting is an opposition of scale, not cut. The scale is from utter failure against the opponent to complete domination of the opponent. Now, this is best illustrated, argues Kretchmar, in the slight differences we see between those engaged in a very close contest. Now, typically, the difference between the runner-up and the champion in the final matchup of a contest of the sport's greatest, say the World Cup, Champions League final, Wimbledon, the Super Bowl, that the runner-up and the champion are often barely discernible, the differences between them. The inches missed by what would have been the winning goal in the last few seconds of a Champions League final, or the 1 inch between what would have been a Super Bowl winning touchdown and a fourth and goal play and a turnover on downs that loses the game. Victory is often at the highest levels a matter of being slightly better than the competition. Now, in this way, the participant is working for the cut of the victory or defeat in the test, but does so by being more or less better than the opponent doing the same in the contest. Now, in addition to the idea that contesting necessarily involves opponents to contend with or against, these opponents share a commitment to better one another's performances. The idea is that contestants are necessarily, as contestants, interested in each other's progress. They have to be, since the contest is won by being better than the opponent. So they have to track the other's progress in order to better that progress. Now, this points us to some interesting differences between engaging in a test and contending in a contest. Though not really developed in this paper, they can be seen in Kretchmar's later distinction of excellences of achievement and excellences of winning, where the excellences of achievement are about tests and excellences of winning are about contesting. What the test taker needs to do to achieve on a test is one thing. It involves a certain set of skills and abilities and strategies. Put this into a contest, and there are some differences. There are new skills, abilities, and strategies that are now necessary in order to not merely pass the test, but to best one's opponent. So we can conclude from Kretchmar's view that sports are tests, but they are also necessarily contests, in that victory is determined by relative comparison to the opponents engaged in the same test. Kretchmar's paper lays the groundwork for identifying the ways that testing and contesting are different and the importance that that plays in understanding the nature and value of sport. Thank you for listening to Examine Sport. You can subscribe, comment, and find an archive of all shows, along with links and related information at sportsethicist.com. Please also consider rating the show at Apple Podcasts, liking it on YouTube, and sharing on Facebook, Twitter, and elsewhere. You can email the show, sportsethicist@gmail.com.